and we are here for the session Back to the Future, utilizing current trends to predict future fundraising behavior, just so you guys know, in case somebody meant to be in another session. I handed out some surveys, so you guys should have those, and you can return them to me at the end. I know a few people walked in later, so if you didn't get a survey, just find me and I can grab you at the end. So here today we have Allison Searson and Jenny Cooke Smith. Allison Searson is the Deputy Director for Annual Fund Programs for the Columbia University, where she's been for 11 years. And for the past 7, annual giving has been her focus. She understands the importance of a solid annual giving program and all that's needed to help it succeed. Her office currently helps to create, execute, and evaluate direct mail, email, and phone solicitations for over a dozen schools at Columbia. Jenny Cooke Smith manages the donor-centric benchmarking program for higher education at Target Analytics, and that's the division of Blackbaud. She has, over the past decade in fundraising industry, worked as both a consultant and development officer. As a fundraising consultant at Target Analytics, she delivered and helped execute results for custom predictive statistic models for major planned and annual giving, as well as worked with prospect research teams to best utilize and interpret the results of well screenings. So that's just a little intro for them. I'll give it to them and let them take over.
Hi everybody. Before we get started, I wanted to just tell you a little bit more about what I do at Columbia and my relationship to Jenny. So my office is a centralized office that handles direct marketing, as you just heard, for any of the schools at Columbia that want to work with us. And we're sort of like an internal vendor, so the schools pay us. And part of our job is to analyze the data and see how their annual funds are doing and strategize, make suggestions for changes. And 3 years ago, we partnered with Blackbaud and their Target Analytics division, and we ran the donor-centrics reports for all of the annual funds at Columbia. And so they're sort of benchmarked against each other, as well as participating in benchmarking with other universities. Our undergraduate school, law school, medical school, and business school did the larger benchmarking. So that's how Jenny and I came to know each other and work together. So use this, right? Okay, so today we're going to look, Jenny's going to show you some of the overall trends for retention, reactivation, acquisition, upgrades, and downgrades, so over a large sample population. And I'm going to discuss how Columbia took action on these trends that we saw within our university. We made strategy shifts at the school level. We improved our internal monthly reporting based on the larger reports that the donor-centrics reports. And then the university got involved, which is really unique for Columbia because we're very decentralized. Everyone runs their own annual funds, except for my office. They come to us to execute their direct marketing, but all the annual funds are very separate, and they have their own branding and their own strategy and their own teams. So to have the university come and be involved at the university level is amazing for Columbia. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Columbia Giving Day because we're just really proud of it. And then Jenny, if she has time, will talk about some new dashboards.
Great. So as Allison mentioned, what we're going to sort of do in our tag team approach here is I'm going to look at some top level, larger industry statistics, and then she's going to bring it down to an institution specific level. So just a little background on the data that I'm going to be sharing with you. It actually comes from a couple of places. We're going to look at some just big overall trends like participation rate and retention rate, and that's going to come from what we call our Higher Education Index on Fundraising Performance. It's something we put out every year for all the different schools, which a lot of them are in this room that do donor-centrics, which is our collaborative benchmarking program. And it's essentially our report or our study to the industry to say this is what's happened in the past fiscal year when we look compared to the 2 previous fiscal years. So I'll show a little data from that. I will give you the advanced knowledge that this is FY11. We are just finalizing our FY12 index because, as all of you know, sometimes it takes a long time to get data. So we're getting everything from the schools and finished now. But I will overlay some of the FY12 data as we're talking. Just a couple things to keep in mind because we are doing benchmarking, so we want everything to be apples to apples and standardized. The data I'm going to be sharing with you is alumni only, and specifically actually undergraduate alumni. We also do have a gift cap of 50,000 in this. What we found is that when we get much above that, when it comes to trend analysis, we start to get into some outliers and some things that can really skew out revenue per donor. So we're trying to get a better idea of the large base. And then it is actual hard credit transactional data, not survey responses, no pledges, kind of everything in hand. And I did include a link to the actual full study, so if you're interested, once this is published, you'll have all that info. Now that being said, the other thing that I'll be sharing with you, especially as we get down into some of the really interesting statistics that we've seen, is some of the studies that we've done with a couple cohort benchmarking groups. So those are going to be our large public universities. So they're going to be schools like University of Michigan, Ohio State, Washington State, so kind of a variety of large publics. And we've also included in that cohort some of our premier schools, which would include private, Ivy League like Columbia, as well as schools like Rice and SMU and so forth. Here is actually the list of all our schools. Again, you'll have this when it's published, but these are our public institutions and our private institutions, so these all go into the index. So don't worry, I'm not going to spend long on participation rates, but I think it's kind of a good place to start when we think about taking and utilizing data, because of course as an industry as a whole, this could open up an entire can of worms. But I think what's interesting is we've been doing the index for 7 years now, and it's certainly gone down every year, and our indexes over the past decade, we've seen this number has continued to go down. And again, that's a whole other session on the why of it, but the fact of the matter is that participation is a really tough subject. We really struggle with these, growing alumni classes, getting more donors on board, and frankly, it can be a really depressing and short discussion if we just start talking about participation rates. So what we wanted to do as we started to talk about data is really focus on some of the metrics that can be as or probably more effective and important when understanding the success of a program. And so the first one I wanted to share is what we call our donor coverage ratio. How many of you have heard of this number? Wow, that's very few. Well, good. So the donor coverage, I think, is just a really fascinating number and metric, and something that if you're looking at data that you may want to be, or numbers to be providing to your staff back home, can be really interesting. So the idea, this is our donor leaky bucket here, seeing some head nods, but essentially we have our current donors and our bucket. So that's going to be our retained donors from year to year. They're our constant. We have things, though, that are happening to this bucket. We've got two faucets on. One, the faucet's coming in with new donors, the other reactivated donors, so that's good. It's adding water to our bucket. But there's a hole in our bucket, and those are our lapsing donors. And so the challenge becomes, can we turn this water on faster than it's leaking out of our hole? We know that there's always going to be a hole. Donors are always going to lapse out. But when we look at this year-over-year performance, are we adding to that base? So this is not looking at revenue, so you could certainly do donor coverage for revenue. This is only looking at donors, but the idea is that you want to add up the new, the reactivated, our current, that's our constant, divide by the attrition, which is just the inverse of the retention rate, and look at your donor coverage ratio. When we look at schools, the idea is that you want to have 100% or higher, so that you're understanding over a year-over-year basis, am I adding to that bucket? So something that you may want to think about, looking in terms of reporting on. I should mention all of the data that I'm going to be sharing with you is data that we do provide in reports, but I also think it's data that you certainly can pull on your own too. So we thought we would start with donor retention. So again, I'm going to talk about some of the larger trends, and then Allison's going to talk about some specific takeaways they've done in terms of retention. So let's start with our index data again. So a lot happier picture than when we looked at participation. So here we can see that FY9 is our gray bar. You don't see previous years on here, but if we went back and looked at it, retention rates really never dropped until we got to 09, which was really the worst year on history in terms of higher ed fundraising. And we have been slowly crawling back for privates, slightly for publics, and you can see our overall figure here. Retention is certainly, of course, a very important topic, And what we found is that when you start focusing on retention, there's really some truths that we've seen carry out for almost every institution. So I wanted to jump into some of those truths in terms of retention. So the first is when we look at donor loyalty. No huge surprise here, but I think when you start looking at retention rates, it's just fascinating how these new donors, less than a third of them are staying on board. If we can get them for 2 years, we're almost at half. Look at our 5 years. Almost every school we work with has at least an 80% plus retention rate for a 5-year loyal donor. So it shows why it's so important to get them at that 5-year metric. One thing I will add on first-year donor retention, this is a metric that we've seen in the past 3 years has gone from an average of about 35 to 40% to now 25 to 30%. Again, this has just become a tougher group to keep. I think our young alums are probably a big focus on this. We have seen as we've done a lot of digging on our young alumni that they're just as loyal, or excuse me, they're just as philanthropic as the previous generations. They're not necessarily as philanthropic to higher ed, but they are giving. What we see though when we look at a lifetime metric is that they aren't necessarily giving loyally like their parents and grandparents did. So I think that's certainly affected in our first year rate here. Now the bottom part I think is just so interesting, and it's something we really started delving into last year, and that was let's measure retention rates for donors that have given more than one time during a fiscal year. And again, we've seen this has really come true for about every institution, and that's that at 3+ gifts a year, we get into at least 80% retention. I've seen several schools that hit it at 90%. One thing I do want to mention, our numbers, if you have someone that's doing like payroll deduction or recurring giving, we actually aggregate that to be one gift. So this is really capturing those people that responded to more than one appeal. And then another constant that we see, and I think it's a reason why sometimes getting a lot of lower level donors just to give becomes really tough in the future, is the fact that the higher the gift in general, the higher the likelihood to be retained as well. Now some institutions will have little dips up here where sometimes there's a handoff from annual to major, and that can actually cause some dips in retention, but in general we do see those increase. So those are some of our retention sort of truths that we've seen over time. So I'm going to pass things over to Allison to talk about when they got this information and this data, how they reacted to it.
So we were no different. You know, Columbia was following the trends, and so we saw this loss of donors and saw the loss of money and wanted to keep them on. So there were a couple of things that we did. The very first thing that we did was the easiest to implement was to increase our ask amount for non-donors. And our thought was we get them to come in at a higher amount, then we're more likely to retain them. So we were getting less new donors, but we were getting people that were going to stay with us. So we increased our non-donor ask amounts. We increased our stewardship efforts. Stewardship is something that is really lacking at Columbia in general. And so if someone gives and you don't thank them, or you don't tell them that their gift is appreciated and necessary, then why are they going to give again, right? So we've done a couple of different things to up our stewardship efforts. Very simply, sending out acknowledgement letters. So thank them. We got your gift. We appreciate it. We're doing thank you calls through our student call center, which has been a huge success. People have thanked us for the thank you calls, so you know that they're appreciating that. And some of our schools are creating first-time donor packages, like welcome package. Really simply, you know, we don't want to spend a lot of money on it because we don't want it to be flashy and them to think, well, I just gave you money and now you spent it on this package. So something very simple, just to thank them for their first gift. And the thing that I'm most proud of is the university involvement, because like I said, we're very decentralized, and every school in the past has thought of a strategy they're going to do on their own and implement on their own. But the higher-ups at the university got together after many, many years of seeing this data. So it wasn't just the first year that we got our donor-centric reports that they said, oh, look, we need to do something. It was after a few years of coming to them and saying, look at the data. Look at the data again. It's not getting any better. That they came together and they saw a need for a centralized plan. So they formed what they call the Retention Task Force, and it's a group of individuals from across the university that have come together and put together a plan to help retention at the annual giving level. And then the third thing that the university has decided is that we should create predictive models so that we can really focus our efforts on the donors that are more likely to give and more likely to be retained. So the next two slides are just a quick synopsis of what the retention task force has decided we need to do, and most of it has not yet been implemented because, like I said, it took us a few years for them to even put the task force together, and it was just this year that the task force came up with these recommendations. So a few of them have been implemented by a few schools, but overall, they're still in the planning phase. So the 4 areas that the retention task force wants us to focus on are solicitation, and I'm going to jump back and forth for a quick second. Solicitation, stewardship, data, and engagement. So for solicitation, as Jenny was saying, if someone gives multiple times in a year, they're more likely to be retained. So the 2 ways that we can have that happen is through a recurring gift program and through second asks. So a lot of our schools are already doing second asks. Recurring giving, we have a few back-end challenges, so we're not really promoting that just yet. We can do it online, but we're not doing it through direct mail or student calling. We would like to use more media tools, which I'll talk a little bit about with Columbia Giving Day, but we're not really, haven't really delved into that too much. We want to test ask strategies and test marketing sequence. So these are some things that we are toying with. We'll see what difference they make, I guess, in a few years. For stewardship, I talked a little bit about it. We recently signed on with a new email program that will allow us to do stewardship trigger campaigns. So as soon as the gift is made, automatically the person will get an email, which is something we've never done before. So as long as we have their email address, they'll have that instant stewardship email. We would like to develop annual giving impact statements, so let them know at the end of the year what their gift actually did. So we thank them, they know it goes towards financial aid or it goes towards student services, but what does that really mean? They want to hear what you really do with that money. So a few of our schools have already developed or started to develop their impact statements for the end of this fiscal year, and hopefully, in a few years, everyone will be on board with that. And then we'd like to implement a loyalty program at the university level. I'm not really sure when this will happen, but to recognize folks that give, because like I said, like a broken record, we're very decentralized. So athletics might recognize you as a loyal donor to athletics. And then the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences is a loyal donor to them, but they're not recognizing you as a loyal donor at the university level. So if you skip a year with athletics, maybe all of a sudden you're not loyal, but you gave to the graduate school. So at the university level, you really are, because you're giving consistently. So we'd like to implement a loyalty program university-wide. So we have an issue with data. Our data integrity, is lacking. We don't have great addresses, emails, telephone numbers. So we've been doing a lot to improve that, and we're headed in the right direction. But that's something that we need to work on, because if we have great data, then we're able to solicit more folks. And put together a plan for data cleanliness. So again, in the past, it's been the school's responsibility to maintain their addresses and update the database. So we're looking at a university-wide plan to maintain the data and to clean it on a regular basis. And then to conduct some surveys. I don't know if we consider this a survey, but we did what we call I'm forgetting what we call it. It was a mailing, basically. It said, this is the information that we have for you. Is it right or is it wrong? And so we printed what we had. We didn't just ask them for updated information, so they were able to cross it out and tell us what's changed. And we got a really great response rate from that. But I think, even more than that, they want to send out some surveys, like I've heard of in a couple of other sessions people talk about, just to ask them more about why they give and why they're involved. But those are still being developed. And then engagement, and this is about a partnership with alumni relations and our communications department. And there was another session that I attended about this, about that integrated partnership, which Columbia hasn't always had. And we even have 2 alumni associations. We have Columbia College, and then we have the University Alumni Association. So there's even 2 units that we need to partner with. But hopefully we can better that relationship, and that will help retain our donors, coordinate with events, and develop a distinct plan for young alumni, because I think they're a unique group. Like Jenny was saying, they're hard to retain, so they need their special plan all of their own, and they need to feel loved, and that probably happen with some new programs that we develop. All right, Let me just speed up a little bit here. So we also want to create some predictive models, help us, like I said, focus on the better donors. We've only done the non-donor model right now, and I just had my colleague, because I'm not a data person, tell me what we did for that non-donor model. Oh shoot, okay, here it is. So they said that we rated interest points, things like things like age, distance to Columbia, if they're actively managed, if they're a legacy alum, if they're married, what their gender is, what their event attendance is like, and with a side note that they are more likely to give after their first event, and if they haven't given after multiple events, then they're less likely to give. And then reunions have a very, very small effect. So that was what we did for the non-donor model so that we could focus on non-donors that are more likely to give. And we've only implemented it through student calling. And then we're developing leadership and a model, if we can, of folks that are prone to lapse. So if we can identify, what things those folks lapsing are and have in common, then hopefully we can predict who's going to lapse and focus on them. But we haven't built those yet, so I can't tell you anything about them.
So speaking of lapsing, we'll look at the inverse of that, donor reactivation. So with our benchmarking groups that we do, we get together and we talk about all these different data points. And it just so happens that reactivation has been like the last topic on the last day. And it's such a depressing way to end a meeting because reactivation numbers have really become a struggle. And this is another area that we saw a dip in 9. That was kind of our lowest point ever. And look at public institutions here. We haven't really bounced back from the bad economy in terms of reactivation. And this is something, we do a similar index for other types of organizations. So a lot of like large national kind of direct mail organizations, and they're in the same boat. I think this is a lot of the issues with people were giving to 7 or 8 different organizations, and then the economy hit, and then maybe they gave to their 3 or 4 that they really loved. They gave less to them that year, and then they didn't necessarily come back to the others. So I hate to be pessimistic, but we haven't necessarily seen anything to indicate that reactivation is getting any easier at all. So again, in terms of reactivation, I thought it might be helpful to see a little bit more into this rate and what are the patterns that we see in terms of donors lapsing and reactivating. So this shouldn't shock anybody in this room, but again, if you see the size of the bars, it's pretty interesting that after that 1 year lapse, where we have about a 26% reactivation rate, look at the fall off from 2 years. So it's very obvious that this is once they hit that 3-year point, really tough group to get back. Our average here is 3%. I see many, many schools on an individual level, they're at the 1 to 2% once it becomes 6+ years. So definitely kind of some modeling territory in terms of figuring out who of that group is the best to get back. But this is a really, it's a difficult pull. So one of the things that we started doing recently and understanding reactivation is saying, well, all of us kind of get the idea that the longer that they've lapsed, the tougher it is to get them back. What about understanding their giving patterns prior to lapsing? So that's what this slide is really looking at. What about donors? And this is only a 1 to 5 year lapse pool. We're kind of taking those 6+ lapse that we just don't get back out of the mix. So if we look at donors that are 1 to 5 years lapsed, and we see what happened before they lapsed, those that gave 1 year before they lapsed, whether they were 1 to 5 year, didn't really matter. They have a much less chance of coming back than those that gave 2 years before lapsing, 3 to 4, and 5+. On a data level, we actually break this down even to 15+ years, so we can get really specific on that. But you do see for most schools that those stair steps to continue to go up. So I think that if your institution is struggling with reactivating, this may be a pattern you want to look at. In terms of action steps from this, you probably want to combine the previous slide and this one to get an idea of those that are more recently lapsed and have that longer giving habit. But I will say a few of the schools that we work with that in FY12 have had a good trend in reactivation. We said, what have you done? And they said, we combined those that had given and those that had lapsed, and we tried it, and we actually had some better success. So, interesting group. So I'll pass things off your way.
So some of this is a little bit repetitive, but why do they reactivate? I was saying earlier, because they feel appreciated, they think their gift is making a difference, and so for us, the key to reactivating some folks that lapsed is to let them know that their gift makes a difference. So that's from actually not really reactivating it, it's trying not to let them lapse in the first place, right? With the first time donor packages, acknowledgement letters, postcard, thank you calls, the holiday card, the Valentine's Day cards, those can go to lapsed folks, and we do include lapsed folks in those. And then coming soon, the impact statements. So I guess this is sort of a mix of retention, not letting them lapse, and then also when they do lapse, letting them know through the stewardship thank you cards and holiday cards that we still love them and we want them back.
I'll just add one other thing on reactivation that we often look at. I showed you the retention rates prior to loyalty. One thing I didn't have on that slide, but it's something we'll often examine, is what's the retention rate of a reactivated donor. So they lapsed in 11, they gave in 12. Did they come back again in 13? It varies. It's around kind of 45 to 50%. But one of the things that we've seen is a few schools have really started to market specifically to those reactivated donors and say things like welcome back and do welcome back packages, and that those schools are getting a higher retention rate for that group. So trying to really address head on that issue of people coming and going more.
Yeah, Jenny, that's something that I actually didn't talk about at all in this is our segmentation, and so we do a little bit of that in messaging when we send out our solicitations. So we tell them that we've missed them, you know, that we hope they'll come back and things like that. So.
Exactly, yeah. And then if they do, we're glad you're back. You know, do it again. So we wanted to switch gears a little bit because we've been talking about some of the rates to measure donor behavior, but this, of course, in upgrading and downgrading, we're really understanding the migration and what's patterns in terms of revenue. So again, like this is not something that's wildly surprising, but I think it's worth taking a moment and thinking about. So what we found is that when we look at the percentage of donors that upgrade, it's really kind of up to this 250 level where we're seeing a higher percentage upgrade. Once they get to the 250, you see that donors upgrading actually decreases. Again, they've got less room to grow, so it's not something that's incredibly shocking, but I think it's worth paying attention to, and again, in your own data, understanding those patterns and what happens from gift level to gift level. We do see that $100 level is where a lot of people tend to stay. We have kind of a lot congregated there, and so sometimes we have very little upgrading and downgrading and a lot staying in the same boat. It can happen at the 1,000 or wherever your leadership annual giving level. That's an interesting place to look too. And then, of course, the other flip side of that is the percentage of downgrades. And we did see in 2009, the first year in history, where our retained donors actually downgraded more than they upgraded. Any other year, and since that time, we haven't seen those patterns. Things are back to more of a normal level. But that's something always to watch out at an individual program, of what are those rates. On the whole, obviously, we want to see more upgrading than downgrading. Also, we can look back at that donor loyalty again and understand what are upgrade patterns based on loyalty. So notice that the longer they give to us, the less likely they actually are to upgrade. They kind of get used to, I give my university $100 a year, that's what I do. Whereas we can see even our reactivated donors, those that kind of come and go, they actually have a 37% of them are upgrading. And if we take that a step further, if we look about our upgrade patterns, we can look those for retained donors. So I gave last year, I came back this year, did I upgrade, downgrade, or stay the same, or reactivated? I'd lapsed. When I came back on board, was my gift higher than it was previously? And you can see actually 42% of those donors upgrade. So again, we've had schools that have really, as they say, exploited this and say, you know, a lot of the reason is they just don't remember what they gave, so they've been a lot more aggressive with those reactivated donors because we can see through the giving patterns that that's a group that will likely come in at a higher level. And I know this is hard to see, so I won't spend a ton of time on this chart, but I do think it's, again, a really fascinating way to look at upgrades and downgrades. And so the idea here is that we can look at, this is for retained donors, so their previous giving level compared against their current giving level. Probably all you can see are these little green highlights here. These are highlighting people that stay the same, or in the same giving level from year over year. And then what we can look and see, people to the left, those are ones that downgraded, and then folks to the right upgraded. So since you can't see it, I'll look at the $100 level. What happened here is 65% of people that gave 100 the previous year gave the $100 level the next year. If we look to the left of that, 15% of them actually downgraded to $50, 3% downgraded to $25, and 1% went all the way down to the $1 to $24 level. If we look at the right, we can see 11% went up to our $250, 3 to our $500, 1 to our $1,000, and then we don't even have percentage points from there. So my point in all this is what it says at the top. Yes, we do have outliers. Certainly we'll have people that upgrade more aggressively, and those are people that definitely need to be well screened and understand, why is that behavior different. But in general, when we look at upgrade and downgrade patterns, we certainly see that people do upgrade that one level at a time. Some of it may be our own doing in terms of the ask that we're doing, so there's some credit to that. But a lot of universities will look at information like this and figure out, do I have an issue? Do I have an area where I've got a lot of people that are just downgrading? Is there a segmentation that didn't work? Is there something that's just not resonating here? So a lot of data, but I think some interesting info to point out. And so what we wanted to do is kind of bring it back to, these are the overlying trends we've seen. Again, coming back to Allison, how did that boil down? What did they really end up doing with it?
So looking at that data, we thought, well, first, actually I don't have this point on here, and I might have mentioned it earlier, but the first thing we did, I did mention it earlier, we increased our non-donor ask amounts, right? So that was the first thing that we did, starting at a higher level. But we noticed that those that were loyal, just like Jenny said, were giving at the same level, and so we became a little bit more aggressive with our upgrade strategy, both with our loyal donors and with our new donors. So as soon as they gave the next year, they were asked for a significant increase in their letter and in their ask string. We are working to implement the recurring gift program with a built-in upgrade strategy, so we're really hopeful that that will keep donors giving, and if we do have this built-in upgrade strategy, continually giving more each year. And we implemented a second ask program. We have done this. We started a few years ago just through the student call center. More recently, we're doing it through email and direct mail, and it is amazingly successful. So we are seeing folks giving their second gift, and so now their amount for that fiscal year has increased, and so then when we ask them the next year, we're upgrading them from that combined gift after their second ask. But I will caution, and the reason why I need my data team all the time to run reports for me is because you really need to watch your numbers, and you need to watch them carefully, because we've been very aggressive with our upgrade strategy, and I think we're at the point where we need to rethink what we're doing and maybe scale back a little bit, especially for those donors who have upgraded consistently, because we're starting to see some of them drop off. And so maybe we're getting to a point that's too aggressive for them. But we won't know that, until we analyze all the data, and we need to look at it regularly. So, like I said, monitoring it is the key. And so we have Target come in with their donor-centric reports once a year, and it's great. And it gives us insight, into data that we would not have the infrastructure to pull together. It's comparing our schools to each other. It's showing, slicing and dicing the data in all sorts of ways that is amazing. But I still need in-house reports. We check in with our schools monthly. Are we on track? Is what we're doing working? Should we change our strategy? We plan to do X, Y, and Z. Maybe that is not what we should do now. Are we on pace to meet all of our goals? And like I said, is our strategy working? So we have sat down many years ago and we created a suite of reports. I'm going to show you a few examples. And they were great. And we were like, wow, this is data we've never had before. And when we present them monthly to our schools. And then our school said it would be really great if we saw just this one other little thing. So we tweaked the reports, or we came up with another report. And we're at the point where we're going to sit down this year and revamp all of our reports for fiscal year 14. Because the little bit of data that we got 3 or 4 years ago was great because it was more than what we had, but now we want more. And we're going to really come up with new and unique strategies. We just need to look at the data in different ways. So we're actually redoing, we're going to keep this report, we're designing it for fiscal year 14. It's really hard to see, so I'm going to have to jump back and forth. Right here. it shows the retention percentage, and right now in fiscal year, we have to run a report for one fiscal year and then the next fiscal year, we can look at the retention, and we look at it on a monthly basis. And so for this particular school, in fiscal year 11, at whatever date I ran this, it was the end of the fiscal year, it was 54% retention, so not really very good, but fiscal year 12, it was up to 60%. And so this is a number that we're looking at every single month, year to year, and we're comparing, are we doing better than we were at this point last year, and it's been very helpful. But we're redesigning it so we don't have to run 2 reports, we're gonna have it side by side, and we're hoping to have multiple years instead of 2 years. And this is another really helpful report. It looks at activity by month. So we can see for the past 6 years, the activity in a given month. And I was telling Jenny earlier, this is really helpful because if we're planning on sending a solicitation, say in February, and we always have in February, we can sort of predict the volume of gifts and dollars that we're going to get. But if we decide to change that strategy, then we can see what we need to make up. So every February we got around 500 donors, but we're not doing that February mailing. What do we have to make up if we're sending March mailing? Because now we have to have the same activity in February and March. So this is very useful, and looking back, we can see if our strategies worked. Maybe for the first time ever, we sent a February mailing in fiscal year 10, but the donor numbers were exactly the same as every other year. So we know, well, that didn't work. So this is also a really useful report. Okay, so this is just, we're really proud of Columbia Giving Day. And all of these numbers and all of the data that we got from our donor centrics report and from our internal reports from our data team really did help us make the decision to do this, or it was my boss's idea. I really can't take credit for the creation of this day. But all of our numbers were showing us, and all of our data were showing us, that we needed to improve our online giving. It was really lacking compared to our peers. So our web giving, and we had no social media presence. I mean, we did, but it was very, very, very minimal. I think that's my next slide. Oh, right, I should tell you what Columbia Giving Day was. So it was 24 hours of online giving. It was a university initiative. So it was, while schools were doing some marketing about it on their own, it was really a university branded initiative where everybody was coming together to show the impact of everybody. Basically, if you have multiple people across the university giving, what the impact is. It wanted to show and demonstrate that unified impact. And the way we communicated the day was by through email, Twitter, Facebook, and the web. And we did mention it, like we sent out a postcard 2 weeks before the event, but that was it. All of it was online. Let me go back here. So the reason why we developed this day was because we wanted to give ourselves sort of like a jump into social media and increase our online giving. We hoped it would help us acquire new donors as a new reason to give, retain donors, and upgrade existing donors, and it did it all for us. So now back to this slide. These were the results. 5,300 contributions in 24 hours, totaling $6.9 million. 40% of the people that gave on Columbia Giving Day were first-time donors. 50% first-time online donors. 8,000 new followers through Facebook. So all of the schools have their own Facebook pages. So this is a aggregate of all of the pages that exist, not just one page. But our Columbia Alumni Association saw a 59% increase in likes just for their page alone. Another really great result is increased volunteer involvement. Because it was web-based and we wanted to communicate by all of the social media, we increased our volunteer activity. It gave schools a reason to create volunteers and to have them post and tweet and send emails to all of their buddies and get them to be involved on Giving Day. And so it was a really great reason for schools to recruit volunteers. It did a little bit of increasing student awareness this year. It's going to do much more next year. We're going to increase our on-campus presence. And then I think just the energy and excitement all around was amazing. Everyone coming together for this one cause internally. I mean, I think that's where it was most amazing, not just the alumni. I mean, they saw the impact, but bringing this decentralized university together for this one initiative was really great. And it was the data that did it, that brought us to that. Yes?
I said the number of new followers through Facebook is higher than the number of gifts. If you look at those that have not made a gift but like the university.
You know, there's a whole bunch of reports that they're creating internally that is going to slice and dice the data from that day to help us, and we're just beginning the planning for the next Columbia Giving Day, and so I'm not sure. I'd have to check with them to see if that's one of the things they're gonna analyze, but I know they're gonna be looking at a whole bunch of different statistics. Yeah.
How did you choose which day? Was it a significant day in Columbia's history?
Right.
Did you look at, I mean,
We were hoping for a significant day, but there was no day that we could find that was significant. We wanted to be in the fall. We wanted to be in the fall because we wanted to be able to ask those folks that gave on Columbia Giving Day for a second gift in the spring.
Okay.
So we knew it had to be in the fall, and then we sort of looked at the events. So this particular weekend was, I think it was 1 week after, 1 week after homecoming or 2 weeks after homecoming, and also a few weeks after our leadership volunteer event that happens on campus. So they bring all the leadership volunteers. So we were able to train them at that leadership volunteer activity that happens every year. We just added a Giving Day component, and then we were able to be at homecoming and, you know, rah-rah. We had a big advertisement up at halftime, and it was very cool. So, and the actual day, the 24th, was just randomly picked. It was more of those other things.
Was it also the 24 hours of giving?
Well, at first it was.
Worked out nicely.
It sounded nice at first, but we're not going to do that again, because if we continue the day, eventually it's going to fall on a Saturday, and then it won't work, so. Yes.
So it's great that you particularly got all the different schools to work together, which I know is a challenge for many places. Have you seen that it therefore poached gifts from those programs in the spring, which is obviously what I'm sure the school's worried about?
Yeah, it varied from school to school. So for most of the schools, there were a lot of new donors, and it didn't. And for those that it did, like there were just their regular loyal donors just kind of shifted their giving to Giving Day, we're just going to have a really robust second ask program for them. And, you know, even moving into the direction of third asks, you know, maybe in a couple of years, because we want to get away from annual giving. You know, we wanted to just to be giving, we give. So that's the plan for those folks that did just switch their giving to that particular day. And, you know, we're also, some of the things that we're analyzing, which I don't have, is did they downgrade on Giving Day just to give a token gift? Do they give a normal gift? Do they upgrade? I mean, these are all data points that we're waiting for our data team to pull together for us.
Well, and just to add to that, because I was at Columbia in New York, at Columbia in January, and we meet with all the different units together. We've done this for 3 years, I think, and the first time we did it, people didn't even know each other. It was, you know, a room full of introductions, and then this past January, not only is it this great camaraderie, people were itching to tell us about Giving Day. So it was really interesting because the units, it just brought this positive feeling. So, you know, while I do think it was very institutional, and I think it was a good feeling to have that Columbia piece, I was just shocked by how excited the units were too.
Yes.
Have you done any of your data, either in Target Analytics or Columbia, by age?
Well, we have looked at it a little bit, and you know, we've developed some strategies by age. So, like Jenny was saying, the younger folks are they're not as loyal. Their giving comes and goes, and so when we have a robust recurring gift program, we want to implement it for our young ones first. Because if we can get them to sign up and it can be an automatic transaction, then we're more likely to retain them, and we think that will help keep them on. The older folks are giving consistently at the same level, and they're less likely to upgrade, and that's what we've seen at Columbia. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, so for universities, you know, we found that looking at things by class year, it's easier than going back to the specific age, since, you know, that information can sometimes be unreliable. I know that class year is a little bit tricky too. But in terms of class year, we've definitely seen that for most universities out there, as you get, the younger they are, the less likely they are to participate, the struggle in retention rates. Columbia is an anomaly because their class of the 2000s are outperforming their 90s. But I think there's a lot of things institutionally that happened during that era that isn't necessarily something that development and annual giving can impact. You know, if people aren't happy when they were there, they're just probably not going to give. So, but it is something we look at for a lot of schools, and it's something in the past year we've added a lot of lifetime analysis on age of giving, because it's really interesting to see that while our young alums may not be giving at high levels, they value the dollar more. So in general, their gifts, once they start giving over that token $10 give me away gift or go away gift, they are actually more significant and they're increasing much faster than say the classes of the 70s, 80s, or excuse me, 70s, 60s, and 50s. So it's, you know, some interesting patterns we're starting to see emerge.
You mentioned with your return gift strategy, you're going to build an upgrade component. Could you elaborate?
Well, we're still developing it, but basically, I mean, there are a couple of things that we're thinking we'll do. So go back to them, obviously, on an annual basis and just say thank you so much for your recurring gift, you know, and asking them to upgrade, but also to interject solicitations throughout the year. So for a different initiative or a different project that supports the same annual fund, we haven't implemented any of this yet, so we're still thinking about it. But so if, you know, all of our schools, they have an annual fund, but under that annual fund, there are a lot of allocations that they can choose. So departmental, you know, student financial aid, there are a lot of choices. So if they sign up for a recurring gift for one of them, then we'll come back to them throughout the year for gifts to the other allocations.
We have a lot of great data as well from, you know, higher ed. There's just not a lot of great data on recurring giving because it just doesn't happen that much. But when we look at it to large national organizations and especially international organizations, if you compare the revenue of a new donor that's just a, you know, a single gift versus the revenue of a recurring donor, and you look at them over a 6-year trajectory, you're going to have a lineup like this versus one that's very straight. So while I think having an upgrade strategy built in is key, at the same time, even without it, we're seeing that there's just much more revenue over time coming from that group.
Do we have anything else to say?
Yeah, so actually, just since I know we're getting close on time, I did just want to make sure you guys had our contact info. And then to elaborate on the handout that Malik passed out, you know, I know that data visualization is a really important part of everyone getting together for this conference. We certainly have seen that while it's nice to have stats, sometimes people need nice, pretty charts to make it really take and mean something. So we have, in the past year, taken all this donor-centrics data and developed our dashboards for donor-centrics that are updated regularly throughout the year. So I just thought, information-wise, this is probably the right group that could have some interest in looking at something like this. So that's just some info on it. The idea is all of these different metrics that we've examined, users could pull and access it without having to request queries. So it's more something that kind of the development office frontline person could access and take some workload off on the advancement services side. So just information for you. I'm certainly happy to talk more specifics. But we do have, yeah, so any other additional questions?
I was just curious if you're seeing any trends with the non-traditional students. I don't know if Columbia does, but I have a friend who graduated recently from Brown, and she's never been anywhere near there. So I'm just curious if that new donor environment is affecting across all those different private and public universities. Just curious.
What do you mean by non-traditional? Because like
Well, people who are doing online giving or distance learning,
Oh,
or
your school is
going to
continuing
a community
learning.
college and then going in and thinking that maybe their connection to the university is not as solid as a 4-year traditional student. And
Yeah,
that's affecting new donor rates.
we have a couple of schools that I can talk about as an example. So the School of General Studies is a non-traditional undergraduate school at Columbia. Folks take a different path to get there. They've not gone straight from high school to undergraduate. Those alumni are very loyal, and they give a lot because I think they're so appreciative of the path that took them to the School of General Studies. But we also have the School of Continuing Education at Columbia University, which is fairly new, and those students, they don't give, for those alumni. And we sort of think maybe it's the stigma of the name School of Continuing Education, so the school's toyed around with the idea of changing the name of the school, and we, through direct marketing, have toyed around with the idea of branding it university-wide and talking to them as alums of Columbia University rather than the School of Continuing Education.
Yeah.
So those are two examples for us of non-traditional that are completely different.
Just a follow-up to that. Is the culture such at Columbia that the academics call those in continuing ed alumni? Are they made to feel as if they're alumni?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are master's degree programs, and the continuing ed school is marketed towards professionals, so the classes are in the evenings, and they are taught by professionals in the field of advertising, fundraising, there's like 7 different programs, and yeah.
Do they receive the university-wide magazine?
Yes, I'm an alum of the School of Continuing Education.
I was just going to add 2 things to what you were saying as well. One is of course, all this data I've shown you is all donor-based, and so we have this huge problem where if people aren't giving, we can't really predict trends on it. So I think the biggest issue with non-traditional students is from school to school, there's not really enough donors for us to analyze to make an impact. So I think it's just a challenging area. The one thing I will say is for our business school consortium, which we look at graduate business school only, there's always this little argument each year as to what data we need to look at, but they always come back to all graduate business alums. But there's a side discussion that comes up about kind of the full-time MBAs versus those that are in the MBA program or, the part-time program or what have you, and no one's cracked that nut. And these are some of the top business schools. So I think it's really, like you said, they don't have that connection.
Thank you very much.